With hundreds of games being released yearly, it can be incredibly hard to actually sit down and know which one is going to be worth your time, and of course, which one is not. That game time that you have gets even smaller when you have a career, or a significant other, children, or other responsibilities in general, so that's where I'd like to help you out. This series is going to talk about games, and if they are worth your time as a parent who does not have hundreds of game time hours to put into it, but would still like to try it out at your own pace. When reviewing these games, I'll be looking at 5 features: the story, the gameplay, the time commitment, the complexity of the game, and my final thoughts. Today, we are looking at Last Epoch, which has recently had a bit of a tougher release with some technical issues to start, but has rallied into a decent launch. After putting some time into the game, I have been pleasantly surprised of how well this game is actually put together. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and listen in to Last Epoch, a Caffeinated Dad review. Starting off with the story, first and foremost, let's get the elephant out of the room. ARPGs are not super well known for their stories.
Wait a minute!
They are there to be sure, and some players take a look at them with some great depth, but it is important to note that most of the ARPGs player base tends to be incredibly focused on endgame progression. But nevertheless, there is a story here, and an intriguing one enough to land a hook, at least in me. The story of Last Epoch initially starts with a brief explanation cinematic as the player enters the game that explains how the cosmos came to be, how the gods within the realms were born. One of the gods, Rye, the god of the endless skies, decided that he needed to flip the damn table because he wanted to be the most important god in this world, and we find out about the keepers, and they are also on Rye's shit list. We then get introduced as the traveler who is helping these guys on their journey, and here we are. You're somewhat typical of an ARPG intro where you're stranded somewhere with not but a weapon, some weak armor, and usually a single skill. Last Epoch at least has you starting in a green biome where you progress through to start seeing hellbugs and a phoenix or two. But as you progress, you fight winged birds, soldiers, and more. The pacing of this story seems kind of akin to most ARPGs, looking to match that of your leveling progression, but not to do it too much that it gets in the way of the juicy combat, which is why a lot of ARPG players play the game. One thing to note is that I actually loved this from the start, and it's the use of voice acting for many characters, especially the main quest-specific dialogues.
My mistake. I can handle Ospreys. I told them to stay back. Thanks. Are you also here for the peace talks? Good. Name's Grail. Since we're I wonder... We come.
I've made mention of why this is a great feature in Path of Exile. I mean, really, I loved the lines that the Templar was putting out, and why it may be one of the most underrated features in that game. But it is good to see there are some supporting characters who have a voice. Also, the dialogue boxes offer multiple answers to each of the statements or questions. Now, they don't really do anything except for offer a bit more of backstory and depth to the lore and what we're doing there. But it's kind of like the illusion of choice, honestly. Luckily, the story here in Last Epoch does pick up fairly fast. Without really spoiling anything, you'll only need to play about 30 minutes for the first major shocking moment and everything to start moving there. This being all well and dandy, I don't think the story weighs down as much as it possibly could have been. Maybe if they added a few cutscenes here and there and added a little extra flavor, it could be more notable. But also take this with a grain of salt. I've been playing a lot of Final Fantasy XIV recently, and there's nothing but cinematics. All in all, you can pick up the gist of what you're doing and why you were doing it with limited effort, which is absolutely incredible. However, the story doesn't necessarily really resonate that well. It's not necessarily a memorable tale. Again, I will also say that this is an ARPG, and without a doubt, it is not the main focus. The main focus, however, is the gameplay in Last Epoch is really, really solid. Of all the classes that you have available, I decided to make a Sentinel, and the reason for that is quite obvious. Hammer throw.
Hammer time!
I found myself many times amazed at how quickly you can create unique skill combinations that make you feel like an absolute powerhouse. Starting with each of your skills as a base, the classes have unique skills that only they can use, not in the same sense as Path of Exile where different classes can use all the same skills. As you level, you will unlock more of the base skills, but where it gets really wild is that you can then specialize in these specific skills to cater it to your playstyle. For me, I immediately had to hark back to my Diablo 2 days playing as a Hammerden, so I immediately started maxing out Hammer Throw and then making it spiral around me as I leveled. Chef's kiss, so good. Another nice feature, speaking of the skills, your skills level independently of your personal passive skills, meaning that as your skills gain power, it does not cost passive skill points to improve those specialized skills. They all have their own unique experience bar that will fill up as you kill mobs. What I thoroughly enjoyed about the skill trees is that regardless of the direction that you really went, your choices on your character would be able to scale. And having said that, they require a certain amount of skill points to move down the trade lines, but all in all, you can't really go wrong as they all tend to lead into each other. Speaking of the passive trees, you have your base set, which for me was the Sentinel. At a certain point in the story, you have the choice to unlock one of 3 mastery classes. This completely changes your loadout and your progression as well as your passive trees. Now, each of these masteries have a unique spin and flavor of their own gameplay, but also the fact of being able to add this as an unlock within the first hour is I loved it. That was a nice touch for me. For me, I went ahead and went with the Forge Guard, again going kind of with that Fire, Templar, Holy Magic kind of guy. I don't know. I always tend to go this way with ARPGs. I can't explain it.
You're a basic bitch.
Now, as far as the combat goes, I will say that it feels really, really good. Your character's movement and skill usage is very akin to, say, Path of Exile, but it also creates a fun dynamic as the UI is incredibly clean and minimalistic, allowing you to focus on, of course, your movement and skill usage. I do, however, have to make a note that some of the movement skills were a little... there was a couple of issues. For example, as I moved past a unit, I ended up colliding with a wall and them and couldn't squeeze past, despite there being a large opening for me. Another time I used Lunge, which is a dash ability, and I got stuck mid-animation and couldn't move or couldn't escape. Luckily, I was able to use another skill to break me out of this freeze, but I can imagine if we were down the line in endgame and I was playing a hardcore character and that cost me my life, I'd be pretty upset. Once you have fleshed out your skills, the amount of items that drop are decent, but there is also a built-in loot filter, which you can customize a little to filter away any items that you're not going to be interested in. Speaking of the gear, the stats and the bonuses are all very simplistic and fairly well explained without being super overwhelming. The character sheet I'm very much enjoyed because it breaks things down into the very basic need to know, and this is what you have to pay attention to, X, Y, or Z, which is very, very nice. Early on, there are, of course, good bits of gear and many things that you can change your focus on, but it was fairly easy to discern what was important, as even your skills have tags which highlight what they scale with and how to build appropriately. For example, my hammer throw benefits from strength, dexterity, and throwing damage, just to name a few. So gathering gear accordingly and building that out is very straightforward. And of course, off of that, there is an in-game crafting system, which is very straightforward for the most part. It isn't as complex as you would expect in, say, for example, Path of Exile. However, it does have a number of options that are very intuitive. As you are gathering these add-in features, they are put together in a very easy to understand display, which is very, very nice, especially because you can get crafting fairly early in this game. I'm sure as you play longer, it will get more complex, but superficially speaking, everything makes sense. Also, huge benefit to the inventory in this game is this button right here, which takes all of your crafting items that are in your inventory and puts them into your bank wherever you are. Absolutely beautiful. Loved it. Now, I will say that some of the boss fights and the mobs that I've fought in this game are very well done. They offer a bit of unique, we'll say, kind of gameplay, but I did have to mention that they do become a little bit repetitive, and in that sense, the AI doesn't seem as far aggressive or as, we'll say, damaging in comparison to other ARPGs. The boss fights, in contrast, are absolutely wild. It was one of my favorite things in this game, is the boss fights are able to not only stress you out with interesting gameplay and a lot of hard-hitting abilities, but it adds that satisfying feeling, and that's something that I absolutely love about ARPGs. And even with that, there's a lot of telegraphed damage, so as long as you're quick on your feet, you should be good to go. And initially, the most satisfying thing of my gameplay here in Last Epoch was my army of spiraling hammers circulating and wrecking everything around me with a crunch of carnage. And even to capstone that, another great part was that I was able to set this up by like level 15. It really didn't take that long to get into some really satisfying gameplay. Now, moving on to time commitment, it is definitely a major factor in any game that I play, at least, and I'm sure that there are other parents out there who would agree with me. Having time to play games is minimal. Last Epoch runs a cost, first and foremost, of $35 US, which can immediately turn some people away when Path of Exile is sitting over there being all free and such. Given the cost of the game, I do believe that it does offer what I would redeem worthy as far as gameplay concerns are. Like ARPGs, when you create your character, you have two options, Cycle or Legacy. Cycle is your typical seasonal choice, which refreshes every 3 months with a new feature or new content. After that cycle is over, your character is then migrated over to the Legacy cycle, where they will stay indefinitely, so you won't lose any of your progress right there, which should be an absolute huge boon for any players who don't necessarily have 50 hours a week to put into the game. I've also spoken in great lengths about games where you lose your progress or you fall behind, especially when new content comes out, whether it be seasonal or what have you. But this game, very much like other ARPGs, doesn't necessarily apply that certain pressure. I view this game like an exponential graph, honestly. It picks up very, very fast, offering tons of meaningful gameplay and choices in a very, very little amount of time actually devoted in. I actually only really needed to devote about 4 hours into this game to create an absolute wrecker of a hammer throw build. Case in point into the game is as you work into it, you will find that you can achieve great things with very minimal to moderate time and effort, which is an absolute benefit and boon to any parent out there. The seasonal changes and of course the legacy panel anytime you spend in this game is going to be worth it, whether it be progressing a story, gaining experience, or honestly just exploring. As I've mentioned, I have not gotten into or played the end game, however I am aware of the monoliths, which seem to be the main repeatable end game content that draws in a lot of players for fast-paced fun at high level. So there is an eventuality that you can get to once you have played through the main game and you have leveled up appropriately. So that time commitment that you have been giving is 100% not going to be wasted here. Well done. I'm on board for this. Now, complexity for a game is sometimes a great attribute, or in other cases, an absolute thief of joy. While I thoroughly enjoyed the complexity of Path of Exile, I'm also aware that many other players did not stick with the game because it is too much. Having said that, Last Epoch really does strike a great medium in the genre, offering diverse and unique choices, but not overburdening players with many systems or unnecessary features. Many of the aspects in the game early on are incredibly intuitive and don't really require a PhD to understand. As I mentioned before, there is plenty of information on these items and their skills, and more that just really lend to itself for the simpler new player experience. Now, comparing this to Diablo 4, where your intelligence may be insulted, Last Epoch does a fantastic job of bridging the gap between theory crafting and execution. One of the best features, of course, with Last Epoch in my mind is the character help panel. This is another feature that has done exceedingly well from Path of Exile, but without a doubt it takes the cake as the most important thing to handle the complexities of this game, especially if you're a new player to the ARPG market. It really does explain everything down to the nitty-gritty details of each individual line of text that could be on your gear or on a skill and understanding how to build them appropriately. But I will say that if you are an experienced ARPG player or even an MMO player, the game is intuitive enough that I didn't even really need to open up the character help panel to understand what's going on. So I will say Last Epoch is complex to a degree, but certainly does not overwhelm and otherwise turn away me as a new player. So is this game worth it? Well, my final thoughts are yes, I think it is very much worth playing as a full-time parent, part-time gamer. The way that this game is set up is that you can have success as you level and as you play, where each step feels meaningful, whether you take it by a single level or passive point earned or completing a quest. Honestly, everything is meaningful towards your progression. The price point offers me some contention for saying that it is worth your time, but I will speak on my own experience and say there's about 50 games that are in my Steam library that I have never even downloaded, so $35 in my mind isn't as bad as it could be. Case in point, with Last Epoch, I believe that the juice will be worth worth the squeeze in your effort to diving into this ARPG. The class diversity, the specialization and mastery trees being a great way to customize your own build and playstyle, but thus far not punishing you for not following a predetermined path. I do imagine this will change later down the road, and especially if you want to push harder and harder endgame content, but I will say it has been pretty quick how choosing the passive traits that most benefit your specialized skill can skyrocket your damage output and make you an absolute legend so fast. And just recapping, I will say that you can choose to be a part of the cycle or the legacy. Both are great choices, but at the end of the day, you keep your character and you keep that progress. So you can take this game into small bite-sized pieces without ever feeling the need to be rushed or pushed into content so that you can keep up with the game's latest update. This is something that I've absolutely loved with Path of Exile, and I'm happy to see it here in Last Epoch. Final rating of Last Epoch is worth it for gaming parents. I'd give it a solid 8 out of 10. Very well done new player experience and lots of great things to pick at your own pace. If you want to see my initial steps into Path of Exile, where I tried to understand that wild game, you can click this video here. Otherwise, stay caffeinated, folks.